The past is history, the future is a mystery. This moment is a gift. That's why they call it the present. Our next guest, Rhonda Victoor, is all about the present. Her company, Incite Coaching, helps individuals and organizations to achieve their highest potential by being connected to themselves in the present. Rhonda is here today to explain what this means, why it's so important, and the top 3 ways to come into the present. Welcome, Rhonda.
Thanks for having me.
So great to have you here. So explain to me what we're talking about with conscious communication.
The groups that I work with, leaders from all different industries, the issue that they struggle with the most is communicating not only effectively, but in a way that influences and creates collaboration. So when I created conscious communication as this umbrella for the work that I do, it was to help them to realize that it's not an elaborate process of going through step by step by step by step that they need to be aware of when they're leading their teams or working with clients. It's about coming into consciousness, which is another way of being really present and aware of what's happening within them, most importantly, and what's happening around them.
So this is the world of, and even just talking about it, I'm slowing myself down. And like
I love it.
You know, it's like I'm getting in the zen, and I personally am really into all of this stuff, if you want to call it that. The question is, when you're dealing in the business world with business leaders, is there more of a interest in consciousness amongst, I would say hard-ass business people?
It's been a steady increase in openness to that concept. I definitely use language that resonates with the traditional business person. So things like influence and collaboration, those have always been important. And when I help people see that those things are achieved more quickly, more easily when we're in a real place of presence, then any uncertainty they might have had about language like that definitely washes away.
So how do you, Rhonda, you're speaking all the time, traveling, you're coaching large and small companies. How did you get into this business, and how do you get qualified to be what you are?
My career started as a manager, so I worked in a university environment, managing 5 different operations. And when I had come to the place where I'd achieved what I wanted to with those groups and began to scan for what's next for me, coaching jumped right out at me. Now that was 17 years ago, so it was really not well known. When I would walk into Chamber of Commerce gatherings and say to someone I was a coach, no one had any idea what that was. They all assumed it was sports and had no concept for the idea of leadership coaching. It's much different today. It's a common language in most workplaces now. We have internal coaches, we bring external coaches like myself in. So for me, it was an evolution into this career. When I discovered coaching at that point, I realized, as I read an article about a successful executive coach, he was describing the process he used to walk his people through setting really clear goals and then guiding, mentoring, challenging them with powerful questions. And that's when I realized that's what I had been doing for the past 5 years, but not calling it coaching, in the work that I had been engaged in. So my practice was launched out of that.
So in 2017, having a business coach, a personal coach, it's just part of our world now. Is that fair, or do you still have to educate people about that?
It's far more common that people have a really strong understanding of what coaching is. They understand now that it's not counseling, even though it can look and feel the same in that a counselor wants to create someone's experience of life as healthy and whole, and so does a coach. But a coach is focused forward, whereas the counselor focuses backward. That still needs to be clarified for some people, but that's getting more broadly understood. And now most of my clients will proudly announce, if I bump into them at a conference or on the street, they'll announce, "Oh, this is my coach." That wasn't the case 10 years ago. It was more something that people did willingly but not openly, and that's shifted.
Right, a little bit of a stigma around, hey, why would I need a coach? But of course, the fastest man in the world has a coach. And the fascinating part of coaching to me, and I was introduced to this concept, I think in the early 90s by a guy whose name escapes me at the moment, but he was one of the first coaches and executive coaches in Canada. The Strategic Coach was the name of the book. And that really caught my attention because the fastest man in the world, or the best golfer, or the best quarterback in the world, the person coaching them isn't as good as they are at what they do.
Exactly. The coach is really great at noticing the gaps, helping us to see what our blind spots are. So I coach lawyers, and I'm not a lawyer. I coach entrepreneurs for organizations from technology to heavy equipment industry. The genre of entrepreneurship or business that I coach in can range widely. It's the powerful questions that I'm bringing to the table, and those tools that cross over industries, like conscious communication.
What are your thoughts on this concept that business and your work environment is over here and your home environment and your private life is over here? I personally don't buy into that. What do you think? Because you're a business coach primarily. What's the difference between a business coach and a personal coach, and how often does that cross over in the real world?
In my real world, they're constantly crossing over. It's really like pouring two different liquids into separate sides of a bowl and expecting them to stay apart from one another. They can't stay apart. One of the things that people will often notice as we're getting into coaching is that when we begin, they'll have a handful, maybe 3 primary goals that they've set for their business growth. And within the first session or two, we're diving really deep into personal challenges. And they quickly realize that when those are addressed, there's this beautiful ripple that's happening in their business life. So as we're addressing one, the other is being absolutely impacted. So even though my work is as a leadership coach, we're getting into the emotional pieces, we're getting into the personal elements, and going deeper so that all of parts of their lives can be impacted.
Yeah, and these are oftentimes people in positions of power and influence, and like they always say, the buck stops here at the top. Maybe not so much with Donald Trump, but and that would be a fun one to take
I don't know that I want to take that on.
But it's kind of lonely when you're at the top, and the type of interactions that an executive might be able to have with their coach, as opposed to someone they can't really have that with their team or even their spouse.
Absolutely. And when I come in as an external coach, I have the benefit of being able to see the whole piece, but not being attached to any element. So often I will coach a leader, and I will even coach others that might report to him or her. I can keep that separation because I'm not attached to the company. We can have that exploration at a much different level. So people will often end a call saying, well, I've never told anyone those things. And it's the beauty of the confidential relationship of an external coach.
So let's get back to this discussion about being in the present. It sounds simple, and I know that for myself, that's something I've quote unquote struggled with. Well, first of all, in my first 20 or 30 years, I didn't even realize I wasn't in the present. So I was just asleep at the wheel. Once it was exposed to me, this whole idea of being consciously in the present moment, and you start to work on that, it's amazing the results that can flow from that. What would you say are can you give us like your top 3 ways that you teach people or coach people how to become more in the present moment?
Absolutely, yeah. So there's 3 words that I use, and I use it throughout my practice: breathe, notice, choose. And each of those words really is a step in the process. So those are the 3 that I'd encourage you to play with. So breathe being the first. When we're in an experience of emotional hijack, which happens up to a dozen times every hour. It's happening every 5 minutes. We're being triggered by something else. When that happens, the fastest way to return back into presence is through breath.
Emotional hijack.
Yes.
And you're being hijacked, and the hijackers are your own past experiences and things that trigger you.
Exactly.
Amazing. That's a beautiful way to put it. Okay, so I'm emotionally hijacked. I notice it. Well, maybe I don't notice it. I'm just getting tensed up. So breathe? What do you mean?
Yeah, deep, slow breath will reverse the actual hormonal process that's happened. When we're triggered, and it could be triggered with excitement, but most often it's triggered with fear or anxiety about something. When we're triggered, we have this release of hormones that gets us ready to fight, flight, freeze.
Right.
It prepares us for that. So slow, deep breath will actually reverse that process and help our bodies come back into a calm place so that we can begin to quiet our mind. So I teach all of my leadership clients the Big 10, which is 10 slow in and out breaths, which you can do while you're sitting at a boardroom table or across from a client. If you're alone in your office, you could actually close your eyes and have a more full experience of it. But you can do it. You could do it while we're sitting here having this conversation.
It's funny when you mention breathing. I notice myself breathing differently. But anyway, so breath.
Breath
then,
is the first.
Yeah.
Notice is the second. So we need to notice what's actually going on within us. When we're in an experience of emotional hijack, we think we're being very rational, and in fact, we are thinking with our rational brain, but we're using that rational brain with a whole, it's like a whole pitcher of emotion poured over it. So there's a sticky mess over top of the rational brain, and we need to wash that away. So notice I've been hijacked, and in the process of noticing, it'll probably be a physical cue that alerts you. So begin to notice what parts of your body tenses up when you're triggered by something, and that becomes your red flag. So begin to notice your own internal triggers so that you become the one that is consciously choosing. And that's the third element. Breathe, notice, choose. Consciously choose how to move forward in your own time. We often feel a real sense of urgency when we've been hijacked or when we're thrown off. We get this sense of urgency, and we end up making choice too quickly, or we choose in the direction of old patterns that we know, if we were to pause, aren't actually serving us well. So consciously choose. I like to invite people to choose in between the two stuck points. So usually we have the status quo and we have the opposite that we're very afraid of, and we feel like we need to choose one of those. There's always a series of other options in between. So consciously choose between the stuck points rather than choosing one of those old patterns.
Very cool. Speaking of time, we're out of it. So I just want to thank you so much for joining us. I learned a lot, and I didn't get triggered or hijacked even once. Thank you for being here.
Glad.
Real pleasure.
Great to be here with you, Randy.